Welcome back to Racing Rundown here on YouTube. Today we are going to be discussing the Coolmore Turf Mile, a win and you're in for the Breeders' Cup Mile in a very important race in this division every year. We've got a full field of 12, plus 4 also eligibles. I'm not going to touch on the also eligibles just for the sake of time, but 12 horses for this race. It's a very wide open race and certainly going to be very impactful for the Breeders' Cup. We'll also mention Eric will have a preview of the Breeders' Futurity, the other of 3 grade ones, I should say, on this card. So be sure to check that out. A link below in the description to that video. Link will be in the description below to that video when it is out. My video is going to be out before Eric's will, though. So be sure to keep it with Racing Rundown to catch that. And we're going to move on now to the number 1 horse in this race, and that horse is Classic Causeway. The winner of the Belmont Derby. He shortens up in this race for the shortest that he's gone in his career in quite a long time. And Classic Causeway, obviously, a very classy horse on his best day, and I mean no pun there, just no better way to phrase that. And ever since he got to the turf, he has really, and he was always a good horse on the Kentucky Derby Trail, but he really took a step forward from his runs on the Kentucky Derby Trail. Obviously won the Belmont Derby and then was third in the second 2 legs of the New York Turf Triple, the Saratoga Derby, and the Jockey Club Derby. The issue with Classic Causeway, more so than anything else in this race, is not that he's shortening up in trip here. It is that he is going to be one of a few horses that will be contesting the pace early on in here. And that's why I don't like Classic Causeway in this spot, because he was really able to win the Belmont Derby because he tripped out mega in there, and it was because of him being lone speed as to why he won the Belmont Derby. Maybe 20 to 1's a little bit too steep on this morning line for him, but I just don't like him in this spot because he's not going to be lone speed in this race, and he really does need to be alone on the lead to be able to have success. He could run a very fine race here. He is one that, aside from, one off day in the Florida Derby, he has been very consistent in his entire career. Even his 11th in the Kentucky Derby was a good race for him. But Classic Causeway, just too much speed in this race for me to go with him in this spot. We'll move on now to another speed horse in this race, and really unlucky for these two to draw next to each other. But that's Smooth Like Strait, Mr. Runs second every single time. Smooth Like Strait hasn't won a race in quite a long time, not since the Shoemaker Mile back in 2021, but he runs his race every single time. It's just that he doesn't like to win at this point in his career, and it's really unfortunate because when he is right and wants to win, he's one of the best milers in the country. He had a string of 4 straight seconds last year, rounded out by a third, broken by a third in the Maker's Mark Mile, and then subsequently followed it up with 2 more seconds in the Shoemaker Mile and the Arlington Million. He's really consistent. He runs his race every single time. The problem is he hasn't won since May of 2021. And the other thing about him is he is going to be forwardly placed here. I already mentioned Classic Causeway will be there with him. He'll have one more horse, Somelikeithotbrown, who we'll touch on when we get to him when it's his time. But with those 3 horses, I really don't think it's going to make it so that Smooth Like Strait or any of these horses that will be forwardly placed will be able to win this race. That being said, because Smooth Like Strait runs his race every single time, he's a must-use in the exotics in this race. A try or a super, you absolutely got to have Smooth Like Strait in there because he's going to run a race where he will very likely hit the board there. So while he's not a win candidate for me, he's a must-use because really he's a must-use every single time he hits the racetrack. We're going to move on now to a former Breeders' Cup Mile winner, and that is Order of Australia. A very peculiar horse throughout his career. Obviously, he has a peak of winning the Breeders' Cup Mile. That was in 2020. It feels like that this horse has been around for ages, and it feels like his Breeders' Cup Mile win was an insanely long time ago. He was a massive outsider in that Breeders' Cup Mile. It wasn't terrible before that, and subsequently from that Breeders' Cup Mile, while he hasn't been the best horse, he's also not the worst horse. He has been Group 1 placed before. He was third in the Queen Anne behind Bailly this year, and he was second at Longchamp behind Dreamloper, who is a mare who's won a couple Group 1s this year. So he has had some okay form, and he was also second in that same Group 1 at Longchamp last year in 2021 as well. So he on his best day he can compete with this group. The problem is I just don't want him because I wasn't a fan of the ride or the run he got last year. I'm not going to say the ride he got last year because that's an unfair criticism, but I wasn't a fan of just the run that he had last year in this race, and I don't know how much of play he's going to take. He actually, you could get away with a pretty fair price on him in this spot, and if you had Order of Australia for some reason in the Breeders' Cup in 2020, or if you like the fact that he's getting back to Keeneland where he's had his best career effort, and he might be a pretty fair price to go with here, but not one that I want too much to do with, just because I think his best run was over a year and a half ago, bordering on 2 years, and I think it's just reaching to think that Order of Australia is going to get back to being able to win at this top level form. He's already proven that in the Coolmore or in the Keeneland Turf Mile last year that he's not an automatic cinch when he comes to America. But you're getting 8-1. You're probably going to get a pretty decent odds break on him. So if you're someone who always plays the Euros against the Americans, he's not the worst bet in the world in this spot. We'll move on now to the number 4 horse in this race, Gray's Fable, one of the long shots in this race, 30-1 on the morning line. He is a stakes winner at a mile in 2021. He won the Appleton at Gulfstream, but certainly he is a bit below the form of some of the top runners in this race. 2 wins this year. One of them was at Ellis in the Evan Williams Turf Mile. The other one was in the opening verse at Churchill Downs over the bum turf course there. Last time at Kentucky Downs, he was 5th in the WinStar, or in the WinStar Million. I can always forgive a horse for if he runs at Kentucky Downs, but, really this horse has been far from graded stakes caliber. Yes, he had his win in the opening verse, but really top graded stakes level. There's some really good milers in this race for America. I think that it's going to be a tough ask for him to get back to his best in this spot, and I'm going to, he's an easy fade, at least from my perspective, in this spot. We're going to move on now to the number 5 horse in this race, one of 2 in here for Chad Brown, and that's Masen, who has been an intriguing type throughout the entire year. He came over from Europe this year with some billing. He was very well backed in the Maker's Mark Mile. Tight, tough defeat for him in the Maker's Mark Mile at the hands of one of my favorites, my favorite wins of the year with Sherrill Spite there. Subsequently got a couple of races where he wasn't facing any competition at Belmont and the Seek again in the Poker. And then he ran a valiant third behind Casa Creed and Regal Glory where he was beaten just 2 lengths in that spot behind those 2 horses. The problem that I have with Masen is the form from the Maker's Mark Mile has not been great. Sherrill Spite did not come back to do a whole lot. Smooth Like Strait hasn't won since. He's Smooth Like Strait, and then it's just very iffy form from that. And I just think that Masen is, while he's good, I just think that there are better horses in this race than Masen, especially Casa Creed, who we'll get to a little bit later. The good thing about Masen in this race is you are going to get a fair price on him, I think. I don't know that 12-1 is going to hold, but you are going to get a pretty decent price on Masen in this race, and for a horse who was a nose away from being a Grade 1 winner, and for a guy as dangerous as Chad Brown, and for a guy who rides the turf as good as anybody, Flavien Prat, certainly notwithstanding a try in this race, and definitely one that I would consider including in this race. We'll move on now to the number 6 horse, and that is Ivar, winner of this race in 2020. Ivar's had a very weird career since coming to the United States. Obviously, the upset victory in this race in 2020. Last year, he was 4th at the Coolmore Turf Mile. But overall, his form has been really good. And while I didn't consider him, he's Eric's pick. And the reason that Eric picked him is because you look at the races that he's had since that Shadwell Turf Mile, I should say, back when it was still called that. But he was 4th at Breeders' Cup Mile, behind the 3-8 O'Brien runner, so he's the best of the Americans that year. And then in the Turf Classic in 2021, he was in that very, very much a blanket finish Turf Classic with Colonel Liam and Domestic Spending and Smooth Like Strait, beaten only 2 lengths in that spot there. So great run from him there. Didn't get a start until the Coolmore Turf Mile, or the Keeneland Turf Mile. I'm mixing up the sponsors of this race. But he was fourth in that race, but then third in the Breeders' Cup Mile last year, behind, and he really honestly ran a better race than Smooth Like Strait did there. Eric kind of pointed that out to me as well. So he's been among the best American milers at this point. Well, he's not for me. Eric certainly made the case on Racing Rundown, and I think, I respect the horses that Eric is going to go with in this spot. And he certainly made the case for him there. Certainly encourage you to listen to Racing Rundown episode 179 to get the full thoughts on this horse. But I think Ivar, Eric made the case very well. His form is very good. He isn't coming into this race off of a layoff like he was last year, and his run in the Woodbine Mile was a very good runner-up behind Modern Games, who I think is the best miler around a turn in the world. So certainly lots to like about Ivar here, a horse that is certainly going to be a must-consider to include in this race. We're going to move on now to the number 7 horse in this spot, and that is Santin. Winner of 2 races over the Bum Turf Course at Churchill Downs. He won the Turf Classic in 2022 and then the Arlington Million. Cuts back to a mile in this spot. He hasn't gone a mile since he ran in an allowance race back in Keeneland in 2021, but he did win that allowance race, and obviously does have 2 Grade 1 wins. The big issue for me with Santin, even though he was a buy on buy, sell, hold after the Hollywood Derby, his 2 wins have come over that really wonky turf course at Churchill Downs. And I'm not crazy about trusting the form from that turf course. The other thing is I think he's going to be on the front half of this. You know, we have the 3 horses in this race who are definitely going to be the leaders. Smooth Like Strait, Classic Causeway, and Somelikeithotbrown. I think that he might be closer to those horses. I don't think he's going to be getting involved in any speed duels or anything, but I do think that this is a horse that is going to be more forwardly placed than mid-pack. So that's another reason not to like him, but I really just don't trust a Churchill Downs form for as far as I can throw it. So I got to pass on Santin here just because that Churchill form has been, he's one of the few horses that seems to have really taken to that, and he doesn't have a win on not that fake turf course. So I have to pass on him here just because I can't trust his races as far as I can throw them. We're going to move on to the number 8 horse in this race, a very interesting 3-year-old, Annapolis, one of 2 3-year-olds in this race, finished in front of Classic Causeway in the Saratoga Derby. Last time out, won the Saranac at Saratoga in a procession, didn't face any real competition there, but Annapolis has been a very promising turf horse for a very long time. Eric and I were both all in on him for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf last year before he had to come out of that. Penn Mile was a weird race because he was off a layoff going into that spot, but then he won the Manila in fine fashion over horses that I liked at the time. Very good second place effort behind Nation's Pride in the Saratoga Derby, and then obviously a really strong effort, as I mentioned, in the Saranac. Didn't beat anybody there, but he's proven to me that he's a good horse on his best day, so I'm not really super concerned that he didn't really face anybody there. I also think, looking back to the Saranac last time, he won the race on the lead because, he was the only horse. He didn't need to show speed there, but there was no one else who was going to show speed. So Irad smartly took initiative, put him in the best position to win the race. This race, though, he's going to have a target. I like him a lot from that perspective. So it's a tough ask. He's a 3-year-old. He's going up against some crack older horses, but I do think he is one of the best. I think he's got potential to really progress. I think he's a very fine turf horse. Running second to Nation's Pride certainly does flatter his form a lot. And the Penn Mile, which is the one bad race of the year for him, and it really wasn't bad, but I would chalk that up to layoff as much as anything else. We're going to move on now to the number 9 horse in this race, Casa Creed. A horse who has been my worst enemy at times. If you're a long-time listener of Racing Rundown, you know that I mentioned him as a potential underneath play on Twitter right before he won the Jaipur in 2021. Didn't go back to him in the 2022 Jaipur, so didn't learn my lesson there. But Casa Creed is also just a really easy horse to respect because he's run some monster races this year. He ran second to Songline in Riyadh in their turf sprint race. Ran 5th in the Alquaz, but that was, a weird race. And the form from the Alquaz has actually not been terrible. And then subsequently coming back to the United States. Really good run in the Jaipur, really good win in the 4-star Dave. He beat Regal Glory, who's the best female miler, and Masen, who I have some respect for. So Casa Creed is just in really good form right now. A mile has always been really iffy for him, but he showed that he could win at a mile last time in the 4-star Dave, and that was always the big question mark with Casa Creed is, yeah, he's really good at 7 furlongs, but how's he going to do at a mile around a turn? And prior to the 4-star Dave, he only had one win, and that was in the Kitten's Joy back when he was a 3-year-old. But he finally answered that question when he won the 4-star Dave. I'm comfortable to go with him in this spot. He is going to be my pick in this race, and I think that he's sitting on one of his best career efforts after what last time was his best career effort. So I'm very excited to see Casa Creed in this race, as you can probably tell. We're going to move on now to the number 10 horse. I've been referencing Somelikeithotbrown. This guy's been around for a very long time. He's one of the horses that predates Racing Rundown. I always love to talk about these horses. There aren't many that are still around, especially running in stakes company, but predates Racing Rundown by quite a bit. And this is a horse who has seen plenty of running throughout his days. All over, 1.25 miles on the turf, the dirt, all over the place. But this is a horse who last time out won the Mint Million at Kentucky Downs. After winning the West Point at Saratoga, which was an off-the-turf race. So coming out of 2 consecutive victories, the big issue with him is he's a horse that needs to be forwardly placed, and there's going to be a good amount of speed in this race. I mentioned the 2 other horses that he's going to have to contend with. Santin will probably be close. I'll get to the number 11 horse, Emaraaty, who's on his outside, but those are potentially 5 other horses that could be on the lead or close to lead with him. So as he's in some good form right now, but I got to take a pass on him just because I think there's going to be too much speed at the end of the day in this race. And I referenced him in this last little bit. We're going to talk about Emaraaty, the second of 2 Chad Brown horses in this race. And Emaraaty could be very interesting. I'm not sure exactly what the tactics are going to be for Emaraaty in this race, but he last time in the Bernard Baruch, he made every single yard to win that race, and he won it very impressively. Start before that in Allowance Company, he came from off the pace. So, I wonder what the game plan is going to be for Emaraaty in this race. There's not a commonality ownership between him and Masen, so it's not necessarily some kind of rabbit thing. Maybe Chad Brown does have him in this race to try to set things up for Masen, but there's no commonality in ownership, so I can't come out on a limb and say that. But Emaraaty, very good run last time in the Bernard Baruch. He wasn't really beating the greatest group of horses there, but City Man's a graded stakes winner this year. Dyna Drive is also a stakes winner. So, he's won he beat some okay horses last time, and, he does provide a little bit of a tactics question mark here. What's he going to do? Is he going to go to the front, or is he going to rate from off the pace there? If he goes to the front, that's going to make a really good group of 5 horses. So if you're looking for someone off the pace, if you're going off the pace in this race, you definitely want Emaraaty to go up there because you want to make sure that Smooth Like Strait, Classic Causeway, Somelikeithotbrown, Santin, maybe he could be a 5th presser. You want to make that a group of 5 to have your best case. Even if it's not a group of 5, I'd still feel good about off the pace here. But certainly, you're always going to feel a little bit better if you get some off the pace presence, or if you get some more pace presence if you're on off the pace horses in this race. We're going to move on now to the number 12 horse, the last of the 12 entrants for this race that we're going to talk about, and this horse is Set Piece. Set Piece is another one who's been around for quite a bit. He's run some very fine races on his best days. He's coming out of a win in the race that used to be known as the DC International. I'm calling it the Washington DC International because I like to think that race was still called, or that race is still called that. 2 starts back, ran over the bum turf course at Churchill Downs. I can forgive him for that effort because I can forgive every horse for running poorly over that. Next start out in the Forbidden Apple, I referenced City Man was a graded stakes winner. Public Sector was 3rd, but he was only beaten 3 1/4 lengths in that race, and City Man was 2 3/4 clear of them. So he didn't run a bad race in that Forbidden Apple at Saratoga. Start before that in the Dinner Party, he won really nicely at Pimlico, so definitely takes to Pimlico, one thing that this horse has proven, but didn't run too well in the Maker's Mark Mile at Keeneland this year, but that was off a break, so that's another thing that I can forgive him for. His grade 1 efforts are very iffy because he has the 4-star Dave last year where he was grade 1 placed, but then he has 2 following efforts where he was 7th in both of them. As I said, the Arlington Million I'm looking past because of how ridiculous the turf course was there. So the point is this horse is probably going to get something to close into. He's probably going to be some kind of a pretty decent price in here. And for a horse who can hit the board in races and is relatively consistent, is not going to be the worst look in this race. Again, price is going to have to work a lot into how you are going to decide to play this race. I'm not looking too much for the prices here. Normally I do try to take some big long shots in races, but I'm not going to do that for this race. But I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of people out there who are going to try to do that, and I would certainly advise game time decision with some of these horses. Look at what the price is and consider who you're going to use underneath. As I mentioned, I'll get into my picks now. As I mentioned, Casa Creed is going to be my top pick in here, but I'm going to go with a couple horses that I was debating whether to go with Masen or Smooth Like Strait as my third horse here. I don't do supers very often, but because I think that this is a very wide open race, I'm going to include 4 horses here. So Casa Creed on top of the 3 horses I'll use underneath, and I'm not going to set a direct order for these, but I like Causeway, I like Smooth Like Strait, Masen, and Annapolis to run. I would probably say of those 3, I feel best about Annapolis behind Casa Creed. So I guess you could say if you really wanted me to give you numbers here, we'll go Casa Creed over Annapolis, and then over whichever Smooth Like Strait or Masen runs third there. But really, I do like Casa Creed in this race, and I just think that this is a very fun race overall. So hope we were able to help you out with this. Be sure to check out Eric's preview of the Breeders' Futurity, and we will see you next time on Racing Rundown. Have a good one.